So to set up for this assignment, we're going to use obviously our large drawing paper. And the first thing that you're going to want to do is figure out the format of your composition. So you may be working in a horizontal format depending on how you set things up, or a vertical format. Whatever it is that you do, you want to put a 2-inch border all the way around. Now I haven't illustrated this for you because I've already done that in a different video. But just remember, 2 inches all the way around with a weighted border at whatever your bottom edge is going to be. Remember, it has to be the bottom edge. I'm working in a vertical format, so down here I've made this edge 2 3/4 inches large. If I was working horizontally like so, I'd want to make my bottom edge down here, and that would be 2 3/4. Otherwise, just remember, 2 inches all the way around. Now, I made these lines a little bit darker so you could see them. They're probably still barely visible to you. You make them as light as you possibly can because you don't really need to see these, just only when you're up close drawing. But otherwise, you don't want to draw attention to your borders by putting heavy contours around them. So a few things that you'll need for this. You'll need some kind of pencil, graphite pencil. I recommend, I don't know, 2B would be okay, but HB would probably be better. And you're going to want to use a light hand, a light touch for this to start off. Of course, you're going to want your Faber-Castell eraser. It works really good with graphite. And of course, if you have a ruler, this might come in handy for this assignment as well. Additionally, I have some masking tape. If you can get the good, I don't know, sort of artist masking tape, that's better, but whatever you can get your hands on, this might come in handy if you choose to use it. And several Bic pens. Now these are just the cheap, real cheap, basic Bic rollerball pens that you can get. This one happens to be clear, but there's other colored ones or whatever. Whatever type you get though, get at least 3 or 4 of the same exact kind. And the reason that is because the ink inside does tend to vary from type to type. And so you don't want a pen that's got a little bit of a different black hue to it. You want it to be consistent. I do recommend black. Don't use the blue ones. It doesn't look as good. And I don't know, several sheets of just scratch paper, something that you can play around on. This is just some copy paper, but this will come in handy as well. To start off, you're going to start your drawing with your graphite pencil. I'm going to draw a little darker than I need to just so you can see it on camera. But remember, these can be very light and gestural in the beginning. So sort of plan out your space. This is your opportunity to use your sighting techniques, negative space, gesturing, sort of figure out how this composition is going to work, and do it very quickly and loose. So I got some kind of bottle here. And maybe, just for the sake of having balance, maybe some kind of mug over here. Okay, maybe this comes down just a bit. Doesn't need to be too fancy. Hopefully you guys, yes, you can see that. I can see it in my monitor. You can see it then. Okay, and then you're going to want to sketch out maybe where some values are going to go. I'm sorry, where the shadows, cast shadows are going to fall. Maybe this one's coming more like in this direction. Pay attention to the length of the shadows. Use sighting to make sure they're not too long. It's very possible that my shadow would actually only be about this far. Just depends on where the light's coming from. You'll have to take that into account. And right now, just in the first couple of minutes, with a very simple gesture, I've figured out the composition that I'm going to do. It's really important that you make your subject matter large on the page, especially for this assignment. Because of the nature of crosshatching and the fact that you're using pen, it's a little bit slower going. And if you have all this blank background to fill in, it's going to get really irritating. So you want to make your objects large on the page so that you can really fill that space nicely. Okay, so the next thing I would do is I would clean this up. I would maybe use a ruler if I had to, but you know, use something to get your symmetry down good. Lines of symmetry. You could probably do it for the mug, though it's probably not as important. Make sure these are parallel and perpendicular, like so. And maybe put a couple of reference marks on here, just as reminders of where key parts of this bottle are going to lie. Same thing with the cup. And maybe down here. Now I get the point of these lines of symmetry is to help get these to look more correct and not wonky. Just a mechanical way of building them. So using my gesture, but then now slowing down and using very, I don't know, felt contour line. I'm going to very carefully go around with my graphite pencil and figure out my contours. Now I know I said for this assignment that we want to end up with no contours. Well, that's fine. In the preliminary stage, you can go ahead and use graphite. To make contours, and these will disappear underneath your ink as you work. So now that I've done one side, I can go ahead. This has a really elaborate mouth on it. That line of symmetry will help me make this look correct. Okay, so now I have a bottle in place. It looks pretty geometrically correct. You know, I could kind of fiddle with it. Maybe I'll shave a little bit off here. But don't spend too much time on this part. You really don't want to spend much more than an hour at most just in the graphite phase. Because the real magic of this project happens when we're working on the pen. Additionally, don't make these lines too dark. I've made them dark for the sake of the video because I need you to see them on camera. Very light graphite lines don't show up very well on camera. I'm making them dark for that purpose only. Okay, then I'm going to go ahead and put this in just for a reminder. And same thing over here. Work on this mug. Okay, and then the handle. Okay, now go ahead and mark out additionally kind of where your shadows are going to fall, so that you know where those are going to land on the page, because those are going to be an important part of this as well. And then your background. Okay, and again, this part of the assignment you really don't want to spend that much time on. You don't have to erase too much, especially if you drew your lines light enough. Like I said, this graphite's just going to kind of disappear underneath the heaviness and the weight of your Bic pen. So before we start on the actual drawing, oh, one last thing, I'm sorry. This is the version that I want you to upload week 1. This is not all the work I expect you to do in week 1, but this is what I want to see you post earlier in the week. Because this way, I can help you if you have any issues with bottles or some of your drawing being a little bit off or something. Hopefully I can address those things earlier on so you can make those corrections while you're still able to erase and fix things so they look right. One of the biggest mistakes I think people make, and I'll show you on this little piece of paper here, is when drawing any kind of cylindrical object, for example, a bottle or coffee mug or any kind of cylinder, man-made, is that they forget that ellipses need to become steeper and steeper as they go down in space. So as I go down in space, the cylinders, I'm sorry, not the cylinders, the ellipses that I see become rounder and rounder. So let's just, this is a very gestural version, okay, of some kind of vessel. And since this is closer to my eye level, this ellipse, it's going to appear very, very thin. But as I go down into space, these ellipses should become rounder, rounder still, and then this is the one where your left brain really messes with you. It tells you that this thing is setting flat on a table, so your mind just wants to imagine it being flat. The truth is, this is the bottom of the cylinder, and so this needs to be the most round of that shape. Does that make sense? So each one of these increasingly gets rounder, meaning that if I'm drawing a mug or a bottle or a pint glass or a vase, the top little ellipse needs to be thinner, and as I go down in space, further down from my eye level, this will become rounder. A lot of what will help is make sure that you draw this in that vertical position. Set yourself up with a board, take sighting techniques, look at negative space. That will really help get this sorted out. Okay, let's talk about the pen. Now, why use a Bic pen? I know it's sort of a ridiculous art instrument, but it's really got a lot of handy tips to it. The guy at the art store kind of laughs at me about them, but the truth is I've seen so many wonderful drawings done with ballpoint pen, and it's very accessible and it's very inexpensive, so it's a great tool to use. So first off, have a sheet or two extra. One, maybe to get the ink rolling, just to make sure that it's not, you know, clogged up or whatever. Now I'm going to show you a series of lines on here next to one another. And all of a sudden I start making a value. Okay. What's interesting is if I take the same pen and I do the same lines, but I press harder, I can get a much darker value. So these are sort of pressure sensitive. Then I can do the same series of lines over here and really press lightly, and I can get a much lighter value. So already I'm getting 3 different values. One here, here, and here, all based on just the pressure of my pen, not even in the frequency of the marks. So that's a great thing for this. One thing I've noticed though, after making those lines, I'm starting to get little ink goobers on the end. Just wipe them off on an extra piece of paper so they don't get into your drawing. Now for cross-hatching, regular cross-hatching, it's advisable that you make your hatched marks after making some series of singular hatches in one direction. If you want to make that darker, go in a direction that's 30 to 45 degrees in a different direction. This tends to blend optically the best. Okay. If I try to make those same marks, I'm going to space them out kind of badly, and then go at 90 degrees, this never really blends together. This ends up looking sort of like graph paper, and it just doesn't have that optical blending that you want to happen. So get those marks closer together and make them at 35 to 45 degree angles. Now, on your long piece, on your drawing, don't fret about this not being able to erase, because really it's never a problem. Usually when you're faced with the issue of not being able to erase, it just makes you make your decisions more wisely. And once you get into it, you realize how quickly it goes. My suggestion, go to one of the darkest areas you know is going to be dark in this drawing and start there. And start lighter than you think you need to go. And start building your values up in different areas, and then if you need to go darker, go back to that area, darken it up, etc. But this will allow you to sort of get a hand for what kind of mark making you like the best. For me personally, I usually like to just kind of make marks that are about this long. You may be the kind of person that's going to want to do squiggles, and that's fine too. You know, you can find that you can just do sort of marks like this. Whatever it is, it's fine, just, you know, keep it consistent. So I'll start on the edge of this form, and I like to put my pen on the edge and kick it outwards. This allows me to get the cleanest edge as opposed to going this way, where it's much harder to stop. And then sometimes I'll get a little bit of a fuzzy edge right there. So instead, I want this bottle to be crisp, so I'm going to kick it out this direction. And just run a bunch of lines in that particular way. Now maybe I'll do some more over here. And already just by creating this value with these singular directional hatches, this starts to stand out from the background. Now if I want it to stand out more, I want to make this darker still, I can go in a different direction. That's about 35 to 45 degrees. And make a series of marks that go that way as well. Okay, and then over here, same thing. Okay, and it gets darker still. Now, let's say I need a shadow down the base of this. I could use bracelet shading, though I tend to prefer just having straight marks. I think they're easier to control. I'm paying attention to what's happening on the edge of the bottle. I know that the values maybe are pooling up here in the neck even more, so perhaps I'll just go in a direction like so. And then maybe it goes over here a little bit. And then maybe it gets even darker right here at the core. So I'm going to start going darker by adding a series of marks this way. Meanwhile, I'm only addressing value. Do not go around the outside edges of your form with the pen. If you try to do that, and sometimes I've seen people do this thinking that they're being clever, they're doing little hatches around the outside edges of their form, they just basically make a really nasty looking heavy-duty contour. Don't do that. Just address the values. Let these graphite lines guide you. If you need to, put them on heavy and erase them later. You can erase them out later as the pen dries, and then you can take out those graphite lines, and then all you're left with is nice values that look really clean and neat. You can go faster if that's, you know, the way that you're comfortable working. can keep working these values upwards, though you may want to slow down because you might decide to maybe gradate the background or something. But do put some background in because it does really help you to make decisions here. And then maybe I'm going to start working on some of my shadow, just with some light lines at first. But you get the idea of how this hatching works. Now, of course, your job is to slow yourself down a little bit and really pay attention to the specifics of how the values pool up in the bottles in the neck of the bottle, how the highlights are there. Try to leave those highlights in place. Really build up those values just like you did in your other value drawings to make them very complex. The more complex they look, the more of a wow factor they're going to have, and more this drawing is just going to look amazing. A couple of tips. So you can use tape, and this can speed up your process quite a bit in some instances. Like, for example, here I am at the border, and say I don't want to have to be careful as I'm working around this border. I'm going to just barely tap this down. Don't press it down hard. That's a mistake. And let's say I'm going to use the basket weave approach, so I'm going to kind of chaotically start tying in different areas of hatching. And then I'm going to maybe put some that go in this direction here. Now the nice thing about the tape is I can just run right over it. Notice how these start to tie together? It's chaotic, but I'm purposefully controlling how I sort of weave them in so that I control how it looks. And all of a sudden my background starts to take shape and it weaves in there. And then take your tape off right away. If you let it sit for any length of time, the glue in the tape starts to stick to the paper really aggressively. And then when you go to pull it off, it'll tear your paper. And nothing is more frustrating than putting all this time into a drawing and then ripping the tape off at the end and destroying it. But look how awesome that edge looks. So you can use tape, but just be aware that you have to put it on, do your marks, and then remove it right away when you're done with that area. Okay, so another thing I want to show you, here I'm just getting carried away drawing, is another mistake that sometimes people make. And definitely don't let yourself do this because it's very common for people to want to, and I'll show you why not to. So let's say I want to bring the neck of this bottle out, so I decide to darken it. Let's say this is lighter than it should be, or I want it to appear lighter, so I'm going to darken the background. I'll kick marks out this way. Okay. Now, what if I need this to get dark as well? This area just off to the side. Some people are tempted to go ahead and just put their pen on that line and kick it out again. But I don't know if you've ever painted a room or a house, like for your rental, or maybe your own home, and heard of the term lap marks. Do you see this sort of unintentional area right here? Right? It doesn't look complete. It doesn't look intentional. It's like a mistake. It's like a lap mark, and it will just go all the way around your objects like some ugly aura that just does not look like it belongs there. Don't do it that way. If you need to make it go out, either do this sort of technique of weaving it in, or use a ruler. use a ruler and really control your background. Stop when you get to the object. Go over here. Continue down. Stop when you get to the object. Continue down. All the way until you reach the next side of the border. Just be aware if you do it that way, you will get ink goobers on the end of your pen, and you should wipe them off after each pass. And I'm just going to move this ruler to the left a little bit, do the same thing. This is kind of mindless activity. You know, you can do this in front of the TV as long as you just remind yourself to keep wiping those excess bits of ink off. This works really nicely. So another method of doing the background, or a combination of the two, whatever you choose. You remember, every time you make art, there's a little bit of an experimentation going on, and it's not all monkey see, monkey do. Now, what else could you do? You don't have to stick with traditional cross-hatching. You could do pointillism, you know, just a series of marks. As long as the entire drawing is done in that same fashion, that will work fine. People sometimes really love pointillism for the amount of control that they can get. However, that can get really annoying, that sound. And it also goes very slowly. So just be aware of that fact. You know, if you work this method, you might be having to put an extra hour or two in just to get it finished, which is fine. You know, sometimes you have to make those sacrifices for the art that you want to make. You could do the squiggle technique. You can make little marks like this. Maybe I'm shading this cup here, and so I'm using these little squiggles to indicate the shadows, maybe some squiggles in here on the inside of the cup. Maybe I should go back with my pencil and draw the edge of the rim so I don't accidentally go inside of that. And I just build those up. The more I build them up, the darker they get. The more I spread them out and the lighter I touch it, the lighter the tones are going to be. Okay, then I could do that in here, and that can be a very satisfying way. It's a little bit more careful about getting the shadow too dark. I already feel like I'm getting it too dark, so maybe I should lighten those up a little bit. Okay, so you know, over here on the mug, I'm using the scribble technique instead. As long as you do the whole drawing in the scribble technique, that works fine. One thing that doesn't work, though, for example, is if you're doing your scribble technique, scribbling away, and you're nearing the end of the drawing and you're kind of over it. I know it happens. You get tired and you say, okay, I've got all this space to fill. And so you just sort of start doing this. Well, granted, these scribbles and these scribbles are both scribbles. They're not the same. There's a quality in these that are smaller, and this looks way different. It's so much different that if you try to do your background like so, and then your foreground with these little tiny marks, it's not going to feel cohesive. It's not going to have that sort of integrated visual quality. So make sure whatever you do down here, you just keep it consistent within your background. Now, I do recommend going back to that first video if you get stuck with your background and look at the other examples, because remember there were several different ways of doing it, from gradations that work their way up, to solid dark backgrounds used with a ruler, to the basket weave technique. All those things are good choices, but don't let that be the major thing. Let yourself spend time on these objects and put some of the background in, at least early on, as a sense of relative value. Seeing this here, seeing the darkness here, will help you make good decisions on the bottle itself. It will look much different if you work just on the objects and then at the very last minute try to fill this big space in. you could end up sabotaging your work in here. You want to work values kind of evenly all over the place. Just keep moving around, working on values so that they all make sense to one another. Okay? All right. I don't think I have much more to say on the drawing aspect of this. Just remember, you can erase these graphite lines after the ink dries. So if you want to get rid of this line of symmetry or any other sort of marks that you have going on here, you can lighten them up or make them disappear. If you do use tape, you know, just leave it on for a bit. I could put it here. That might speed up some time when I'm trying to capture the edge of this table. Or even the edge of a bottle. Peel them up pretty quickly. Don't let them sit on there for, you know, over a few hours, or else they may give you trouble. But look how nice and clean that edge is. Excuse me. All right, I think that's good enough for the demo part of it. I might give you a little example of kind of some ideas of things to set up, but just like the other value drawings, really work in a controlled lighting situation. Make sure that you have a nice strong lamp, controlled lighting where the light of the sun is being blocked out, maybe a white tablecloth, and 3 to 4 objects, preferably clear, dark, white, metallic, but things in a very recognizable value range will make this drawing go much easier.